I saved for 40 years. I want you to understand what that actually means before I tell you what happened to the money. I am not talking about setting a bit aside each month while living comfortably. I am talking about 40 years of conscious, deliberate, sometimes uncomfortable restraint, bringing a packed lunch to work every single day for 2 decades, buying second-hand cars and running them until the repair bills exceeded the value, taking holidays in Landudno and Tenby while colleagues flew to Tenerife, declining pub rounds without embarrassment, wearing suits until the elbows went and then having the elbows patched. I kept a spreadsheet. This was before spreadsheets were fashionable. I mean a physical ledger, columns in my own handwriting, tracking every pound that came in and every pound that went out, every month, for the better part of 3 decades. I did this because I was a local council budget officer, and I understood, better than most people, that money saved in quiet years is the only money you can rely on in the years that turn out to be less quiet. I saved £190,000 over a working life that was not well paid. There was no inheritance, no windfall, no lucky investment, just 40 years of choosing not to spend what I did not need to spend. And I lost every penny of it, because I would not pay a property lawyer £800 to check a title deed. That is the story. The rest is the detail of how a man who watched every £10 expenditure for 4 decades managed to make the one mistake that cost him everything he had. My name is Norman. I am 70 years old. I am from Coventry, though I have not lived there in 3 years. And I am now living in a 1-bedroom flat in Leamington Spa that belongs to my younger sister, who has been kinder to me than I deserve, and for which I pay her a below-market rent, because that is all I can manage on my state pension and the very small council pension that represents 40 years of public service. I tell you these details not for sympathy, but because precision matters to me. It always has. And vague descriptions of financial catastrophe do not help the people who most need to hear them. I retired in September of 2019 at the age of 67, following a career in local government finance that had been unglamorous and, in my opinion, undervalued by the people it served. I had spent 40 years scrutinizing other people's budget requests, querying every line, asking whether that conference trip was truly necessary, and whether those stationary costs could be reduced, and whether the agency staff rate could be renegotiated. I was good at this. I was not universally liked for it. The departments whose requests I cut did not send me leaving cards. But I was effective, and the council's accounts were clean on my watch. And that was what I had been employed to do. When I retired, I was given a modest send-off in the 4th-floor meeting room, a bottle of decent scotch from the senior management team, and the genuine good wishes of the 3 or 4 colleagues who had understood what I was actually doing all those years. My wife Patricia and I had divorced in 2003, which was the one expense in my life that I had not been able to control, and which had cost me the house we owned in Earlsdon. She received the house and I rented a flat on the Kenilworth Road for the following 16 years, continuing to save, continuing to track every expenditure, and developing, in that period of solitary domestic life, the habits of frugality that became so ingrained they eventually stopped feeling like habits and started feeling like character. I did not resent the divorce settlement. I resented the loss of the house, which was an asset, but I did not resent Patricia, who had been reasonable throughout, and who had since remarried, and was, from what I could tell from occasional mutual acquaintances, quite content. We had no children. The absence of children simplified things. I had been to Thailand once, in 2017, on a package holiday to Hua Hin that I had found in a January sale, 10 nights, half-board, Prachuap Khiri Khan province, for a total cost including flights of £847. Which was the least expensive foreign holiday of reasonable length I had been able to identify that year. I chose it for cost reasons, not enthusiasm. I expected to dislike it, or at best to find it acceptable. What I found instead was that I liked it very much. The long, quiet beach, the low-rise character of the town compared to Pattaya or Phuket, the food at the market stalls along Dechanuchit Road that cost 40 baht, approximately 90 pence, per portion, and was better than anything available in Coventry at any price. the general quality of the light and air, and the specific easiness of the pace of life that Hua Hin has compared to Bangkok, 2 hours north. I filed this away as a useful discovery and went back to Coventry and thought about it for 2 years. When I retired in September of 2019 and sat down with my ledger, still physical, still handwritten, by then supplemented but not replaced by a laptop spreadsheet, and assessed my position, I found that I had £190,000 in savings, a council pension that would pay £11,400 per year, and a state pension that would shortly supplement that with a further £9,100. Total annual income in retirement, approximately £20,500, before tax. In Coventry, with the flat rent I was paying and my established habits of living, this was manageable, but not comfortable. In Hua Hin, which I had researched with the care I applied to all budget questions, the same income would support a substantially better standard of living, with money remaining each month, rather than running close to zero. The mathematics were clear. A one-bedroom condo in a reasonable development in Hua Hin could be purchased for between 2.8 and 4.5 million baht, which at the exchange rate prevailing in early 2020 was between £67,000 and £107,000. My savings would cover this comfortably, with a significant reserve remaining. The monthly costs, maintenance fees, utilities, food, transport, would run to perhaps 18,000 baht per month, approximately £430. My pension income, converted at the same rate, was over £1,700 per month. The surplus was real and substantial. I made the decision with the same methodical confidence I had brought to 40 years of budget analysis. I booked a flight to Bangkok for March of 2020. The pandemic intervened, as it did with the plans of a great many people that March. I did not arrive in Thailand until November of 2020, having spent the intervening months in the Kenilworth Road flat, following government guidance and reorganizing my research, which by that point was extensive. I had identified 3 developments in the Hua Hin area that appeared to offer suitable units at appropriate price points. I had printed the details of each, annotated them, and organized them in a ring binder. I had read the relevant sections of the Thai property law guidance published on the British Embassy website. I knew that as a foreign national I could not own land in Thailand, but could own a condominium unit outright, subject to the building's foreign ownership quota, not exceeding 49% of total units. I had looked at this. I had checked the figures. I had done what I considered to be thorough research. What I had not done, and this is the thing that I have to force myself to state plainly, because even now it produces in me a feeling that I can only describe as a kind of winded shame, was factor the cost of independent legal advice into my budget or my planning. I had noted on my spreadsheet that conveyancing solicitors in Thailand charged between 10,000 and 30,000 baht. I had decided this was an unnecessary expense. I had been doing my own research, and the research was thorough, and I was not going to pay someone to repeat work I had already done. I arrived in Hua Hin on a warm November afternoon and took a Songthao, a shared pickup truck taxi, from the bus station on Phetkasem Road to the guest house I had booked at 450 baht per night, which was on the low end of available options and which was clean and functional and entirely adequate for my purposes. I was 68 years old and carrying a single roller case and a backpack containing my laptop, my research ring binder, and a flask of instant coffee I had brought from Coventry, because I had read that filter coffee in Hua Hin was harder to find than instant. I tell you the flask because it is exactly the kind of detail that, when I describe it now, I can see clearly what it represented. A man who had budgeted so completely for every contingency that he had packed his own coffee from England rather than spend 30 baht a cup in Thailand, and who was about to hand over his entire life savings with no independent verification of what he was buying. I visited the first development on my list on the second morning. It was a condominium complex on Soia 88, south of the main Hua Hin town center, 15 minutes walk from the beach, consisting of 3 low-rise blocks around a central pool. The showroom was on the ground floor of the sales office, and it was there that I met Malie. She was 27, though again I did not know her age at the time, and she managed the showroom with an efficient and pleasant professionalism that I associated, perhaps naively, with the kind of organized competence I had valued in my own professional life. Her English was good. She had studied hospitality management at a Bangkok college, she told me during that first meeting, and she walked me through the available units with a clarity and lack of pressure that I found reassuring. I was shown a 7th-floor unit, 52 square meters, 1 bedroom, a balcony with a partial sea view if you stood at the right angle. The asking price was 7.2 million baht. At the November 2020 exchange rate of approximately 41.5 baht to the pound, that was 173,494 pounds, within my parameters. I returned the following day to ask more questions, having spent the evening going through my notes. I had a list of 14 questions, which I presented to her in writing, and she answered each one with patience and what seemed like genuine knowledge. I left the second meeting feeling positive. On the third day, she asked if I would like to have lunch nearby to discuss the purchase process in more detail, framing it as a practical offer rather than a social one. We ate at a restaurant on Narat Damri Road. She had rice and green curry. I had the same because it was 80 baht and excellent. And over that lunch, I understood that she was not simply a sales professional. She was interested in me, in the specific direct way that is different from professional interest, and she expressed this without coyness or calculation, or so it seemed to me at the time. I want to be honest here about something. I was not naive about the age difference. I was 68 and she was 27. And I was aware that this was the kind of situation that other people viewed with skepticism, and I was aware that Thailand had a specific reputation in this regard. I was not unaware of any of this. What I told myself, and this is the version of myself I most need you to understand, was that I was too careful and too experienced and too fundamentally sensible to be taken in by anything. I had spent 40 years not being taken in by anything. I was not about to start at 68. The confidence in my own caution was, itself, the trap, because the one area in which I was not cautious, the one expenditure I had already mentally ruled out as unnecessary, was the professional verification that would have made everything else irrelevant. The relationship developed over the following 3 weeks in a way that I experienced as natural, though I can see now that its pace and texture were managed. We had dinner 4 more times, at the same kind of inexpensive local restaurants that suited my habits, and she never suggested anywhere that would have strained my budget, which I noticed and took as a positive sign about her values, rather than as an indication that she understood my values well enough to mirror them back. She introduced me to her mother, a quiet woman who ran a small food stall on the night market near the clock tower, and who received me with warmth and a plate of pad pak ruam, mixed stir-fried vegetables, that I ate appreciatively, and for which I tried to pay, and was refused, which I also took as a positive sign. I was shown photographs of her younger brother, who was doing military service up north. The family picture that was assembled for me across those 3 weeks was simple and decent. Hard-working mother, dutiful daughter, younger sibling serving his country, and it served the purpose of making the purchase of a property in a development where Mali worked feel like it was being done among people rather than through a commercial transaction. I did not ask myself whether the picture had been assembled deliberately. The thought did not present itself in that form. There was one moment during that period that I have since returned to many times. During our third dinner, she mentioned, casually, that her father was in a different line of work from her mother. Something in finance, she said. Private lending arrangements. He knew a lot of people in the Prachuap Kiri Khan property world. She said this in the same register as one might mention that a parent had worked in insurance or banking, briefly and without emphasis. I noted it as biographical information and moved on. I think about that moment now quite often, she told me. She told me exactly who her father was and what he did, and the world he operated in, and I absorbed it as background and filed it as irrelevant and poured another glass of water. If I had been applying to that dinner table 1/10 of the budget scrutiny I had applied for 40 years to council expenditure requests, that single sentence would have stopped me cold. But I was not applying that scrutiny. I was having dinner. I believed those were different activities. They were not. In mid-December of 2020, I told her I wanted to proceed with the purchase of the 7th floor unit. She managed the paperwork efficiently. The purchase contract was in Thai, as all Thai property contracts are, with an English summary attached. I read the English summary carefully. I did not have the Thai original independently translated. I was offered a referral to a local firm of property lawyers who handled conveyancing for foreign buyers. The referral came from the sales office. I noted the fee, 25,000 baht, approximately £600, and decided it was not necessary given the research I had already done. I had read the English summary. I understood the structure. I had bought a flat in Coventry in 1988, and I understood what a property purchase involved. I was not spending £600 on someone to tell me things I already knew. The title to the unit was registered in Mali's name as my Thai nominee, which is the structure used by foreign nationals to hold property that exceeds the foreign ownership quota in a given building. I had read about this structure. I understood that it required the nominee to hold the title on trust for the beneficial owner, and that the arrangement was commonly used. I had not had a lawyer review the specific trust documentation to verify that my interests were in fact protected within it. I had not independently confirmed with the land department, which is straightforward to do, and takes about 40 minutes, and requires only the title deed number, that no encumbrances existed on the property prior to or at the time of purchase. I had not done these things because they all cost money and time, and I had done my research and I was confident. The transfer of funds happened in January of 2021. I wired 7.2 million baht, £173,494 at the rate that day, from my UK savings account to the developer's account. Details provided by Mali. The remaining balance of my savings, after transfer fees, was £15,872. I was 68 years old, and I had spent my life savings on a condominium in Hua Hin that I had not yet moved into, but that I believed I owned. The keys were collected on the 17th of January. I remember that morning clearly. The light was very bright, that specific hard winter brightness that Hua Hin has in January, when the Gulf sky is absolutely clear, and I stood on the balcony with the partial sea view, and I drank instant coffee from my Coventry flask, and I thought, this is the most I have ever spent on anything, and it is exactly right. The first months in the condo were, genuinely, very good. I want to say that without qualification, because I think honesty requires it. The unit was clean and well built. The pool was maintained. The building management were responsive. I established a daily routine: morning walk along the beach path toward the fishing pier, breakfast at one of the market stalls on Naret Damri, the afternoon reading on the balcony, or taking the Songtho into town for errands. That suited me precisely. My monthly outgoings ran to approximately 17,500 baht, just under my projected 18,000, which gave me modest satisfaction. My pension income, after currency conversion, left me with a surplus each month. The mathematics worked. Mali and I continued to see each other, though the relationship changed in character after I moved in. She was less consistently available than she had been during the purchase process. She explained this as the demands of her work, the sales office being busy with new inquiries. I accepted this. There were evenings she did not respond to messages until the following morning, which she attributed to early nights after tiring days. I accepted this also. I think I want to be precise about the nature of my acceptance. It was not the acceptance of someone who had noticed something and chosen to overlook it. It was the acceptance of someone who had not yet formed the habit of noticing, because there had been no previous occasion on which the noticing had been necessary. Looking back, I realize I had no experience of personal vigilance. My vigilance had always been professional and directed outward, at budgets and procurement and other people's expenditure. I had never turned it inward. In April of 2021, she told me her father needed 45,000 baht for a medical procedure. She said he had a heart condition and the provincial hospital could manage only part of the treatment, that the remainder required a private clinic in Hua Hin. She did not ask me directly. She mentioned it in the way that someone mentions a worry they are carrying, without framing it as a request. I transferred the 45,000 baht the following day. I thought, I have a surplus each month. Her father is ill. This is not a complicated decision. The amount, approximately £1,080 at the April rate, was within the range I could absorb without disrupting my monthly calculations. I recorded it in my spreadsheet as Family Medical Support, April 2021, and moved to the next column. I want to note something about the irony of the medical request specifically, now that I know what I know about her father's actual profession. Kun Prasert, who operated informal property-backed lending and who had registered a 2.1 million baht mortgage against my property 2 months earlier, did not need 45,000 baht for a heart procedure. He was in excellent professional health, generating a return on a loan secured against a foreign national's life savings. The 45,000 baht request was either a further extraction, money on top of the mortgage interest, taken simply because the mechanism was available, or a test of how readily I would provide when asked indirectly. I suspect the latter. It is what I would have done, in his position, to assess how much further the operation could be extended. I find, when I think about it in these terms, that I can recognize the logic even while despising the application. This is an occupational hazard of having spent your career in financial analysis. You can follow the reasoning of people who are doing things you find reprehensible. What I did not know at this point, and what I did not discover until considerably later, was that Mali's father was not a civil servant with a heart condition, but an operator of informal property-backed lending in the Prachuap Khiri Khan area. A man named Kun Prasert, who arranged private loans secured against property assets for borrowers who could not or would not use formal banking channels. The condo unit I had purchased had been identified by him before my purchase was finalized, through information accessible to his daughter via her position in the sales office. A loan of 2.1 million baht, approximately £50,600 at the rate prevailing at the time of registration, had been secured against the title of the unit, using Mali as the registered owner, on the 18th of January 2021, the day after I collected the keys. The mortgage had been registered at the Hua Hin Land Department office on a Tuesday morning while I was unpacking boxes in the 7th floor unit and making plans for where to put the single piece of artwork I had brought from Coventry. A small print of the Kenilworth Castle ruins that I had owned for 30 years and which had hung in every flat I had rented since the divorce. I did not know about the mortgage for 17 months. During those 17 months, the following things happened. I transferred 45,000 baht for her father's medical procedure, as mentioned. I transferred 28,000 baht in August of 2021 for what she described as roof repairs to her family's house in the village south of Hua Hin, where her parents lived. I paid 12,000 baht toward what she said was her brother's transition costs when he completed military service and needed to establish himself. In November of 2021, she mentioned, in passing, that the sales office was not so busy now, and that her income had reduced, and I began, without this being formally agreed, to cover more of the shared household costs when she stayed with me: food, transport, the occasional dinner out, which I estimated at an additional 8,000 to 10,000 baht per month. None of these amounts was individually large enough to disturb my monthly surplus significantly. Collectively, across 17 months, they totaled approximately 310,000 baht, or just under £7,500. I kept a record, because I keep records of everything. I recorded these as joint household and family support costs, and I did not regard them as a warning sign. I regarded them as the financial texture of a relationship, which is what I believed I was in. There was a morning in late 2021, November I think, because the weather had turned slightly cooler and I had started wearing a light jacket on my morning beach walks, a specific cotton jacket from Marks & Spencer that I had bought in a sale in 2018, when she arrived at the condo earlier than expected and received a phone call while I was making coffee. She went out to the balcony. I could hear the tone of the conversation through the sliding door, but not the words, and the tone had a quality that I noted and categorized without knowing what category it belonged to. It was not the tone of a conversation about a family member's health or a work matter. It had a different urgency, lower and more compressed. When she came back in, she said it was her mother, and they were having a disagreement about the market stall operating hours. I made no comment. I poured the coffee. I thought, that didn't sound like a conversation about a market stall. And then I thought, and what exactly would such a conversation sound like, Norman, given that you've never heard one? And I let the thought dissolve into the morning. An expat named Ian, who was 66 and had been in Hua Hin for 4 years, and whom I had met through a small group of British retirees who gathered on Thursday mornings at a coffee shop near the night market, told me in February of 2022 that he had a friend who had purchased a condo through a nominee arrangement and discovered, 2 years later, that the nominee had registered an encumbrance against the title. He told this story with the careful neutrality of a man who was aware he was telling it in the hearing of someone who might be in a similar position. I listened, I thanked him, and I told myself with the complete, quiet confidence of a man who has been careful all his life and believes his carefulness is comprehensive, that I had researched the nominee arrangement thoroughly and understood its structure, and that this kind of thing was what happened to people who did not do their research, which I had done. I believed this sincerely. I was wrong in the most expensive way I have ever been wrong about anything. The property tax notice arrived in June of 2022. It was addressed to the condo unit, to the Thai name of the registered owner, which was Malese, and it arrived in the building's postal box, which I checked each week as part of my routine. I recognized it as a government document because of the header and the official formatting, and because my Thai had improved enough over 18 months to read simple administrative text, though not legal text. I took it inside. I used a translation application on my phone to work through the body of the notice, paragraph by paragraph. It took me approximately 25 minutes. By the end of those 25 minutes, I understood 3 things. The first was that the notice related to property taxes on the condo unit I believed I owned. The second was that there were outstanding tax obligations linked to a registered charge against the property. The third was the specific phrase that the translation application rendered as mortgage encumbrance registered January 18, 2021, followed by a figure of 2.1 million baht and the name of the lender, which was given as an individual's name, Kun Prasert. I am not going to pretend I reacted with professional composure. I sat down on the sofa with the tax notice and my phone, and I read the translation a second time, and a third time, and I had what I can only describe as a full-body response to the information. A cold heaviness that began in my chest and moved into my arms, a ringing quality in my head, the sensation of the room having shifted slightly in its spatial relationship to me. I had spent 40 years in budget management. I understood what a registered mortgage meant. I understood that on the 18th of January 2021, the morning after I collected the keys to a property I had paid £173,494 for, someone had registered a 2.1 million baht charge against that property's title, using the name of the person who held the title as my nominee. I understood that this charge had existed for 17 months while I had been living in the property, paying for the property's upkeep, and contributing financially to the life of the person who had facilitated it. I rang Malese. She did not answer. I sent a message explaining what the notice had said and asking her to call me. She read the message. The blue ticks appeared within minutes and did not respond for 4 hours. When she did respond, it was a voice message, not a call, and the message said that there had been a family financial situation that she had needed to resolve urgently the previous year, and that the condo had been used to secure a short-term loan that was nearly paid off, and that she had been planning to tell me, but the time had never seemed right. She said the words with a calmness that I found, in that moment, more frightening than anger would have been. I met her the following day. I had, in the interval, consulted an online property law resource for Thailand and confirmed what I already understood, that a registered mortgage against a property title takes precedence over informal nominee arrangements, and that the nominee's obligations to the beneficial owner, while legally arguable, are practically very difficult and expensive to enforce against a registered security holder who is a third party. I had also confirmed that the amount registered, 2.1 million baht, at prevailing interest rates for informal private lending, would likely have grown through accumulated interest charges. I had also confirmed that I had no independent documentation of the trust arrangement between myself and Mali that would be robust enough to be useful in Thai court proceedings, because I had not had a lawyer prepare such documentation at the time of purchase. I had all of this information when I sat across from her in the coffee shop on Fetkasem Road where we had met before. The version of Mali that I encountered in that meeting was not the woman from the showroom or the first 3 months. She was composed, and the composure was not the composure of someone managing distress, but the composure of someone who had already worked out the available options and was executing the one that best served her interests. She told me that her father had needed to raise capital quickly in January of 2021 and had used the condo as security because it was registered in her name and the loan was available immediately. She said she had intended to discharge the mortgage from the loan proceeds and that circumstances had made this slower than expected. She said she was sorry that I had not known. She said this last part in a tone that communicated clearly that being sorry was the end of the matter as far as she was concerned. I asked her directly whether she had known about the mortgage registration on the 18th of January 2021. She said her father had handled the arrangements. She did not answer the question I had asked. I asked it again, more plainly. She said, "My father need money. He use what he can use." She picked up her coffee cup and held it, and looked at me in a way that I found difficult to read, and still do. Not defiant exactly, not apologetic, something more neutral than either, like someone who had made a calculation and completed it and was simply waiting for the administrative aftermath to conclude. I asked her whether she had known, at the time of the sale, at the time she walked me through the showroom unit and answered my 14 written questions, that her father intended to use the registered title as security for a loan. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I hope it work out differently," which is the closest thing to an answer I received, and which I have thought about many times since, because it is ambiguous in a way that may be deliberate or may simply reflect how people speak when they are in the process of having something catch up with them. I did not shout. I want to be clear about that. I have never been a person who shouts, and I was not going to become one in a coffee shop in Hua Hin. What I did was thank her for meeting me and tell her I would need to take legal advice. She said she understood. She left. She did not contact me again. The legal advice came from a firm in Bangkok that was recommended by the British Embassy's list of registered legal practitioners, and it was delivered by a Thai solicitor who had 20 years of property law experience, and who was, I think, as kind as she could be given the information she had to convey. The mortgage registered by Kun Prasert against the unit title was valid. It had been registered correctly at the land department. The beneficial ownership claim I could make as the person who had provided the purchase funds was not without legal merit, but would require civil litigation that she estimated would take between 2 and 4 years, cost between 200,000 and 500,000 baht in legal fees, and result in an outcome she described as uncertain. The outstanding balance on the mortgage, including accumulated interest, was approximately 2.7 million baht. If the charge was not discharged, the lender had the right to seek enforcement. The property could be sold to recover the debt. My 173,494 pounds, in that scenario, would yield me nothing after the mortgage was settled. She gave me a written summary of all this. I read it twice in her office and took it back to Hua Hin on the bus, sitting in my usual seat by the window with the summary on my lap, watching the flat coastal landscape between Bangkok and Prachuap Khiri Khan pass in the late afternoon light. Ian did not say "I told you so" when I told him what had happened, which was decent of him. What he said, after a long pause over his coffee, was, "Did you have a lawyer check the title?" And when I told him I had not, he was quiet for another moment and then he said, very quietly, "Norman, they check for encumbrances. That's half the reason they exist. I knew this. I had known this. I had decided the cost was unnecessary. I am not going to construct any more elaborate explanation than that. I made one further attempt to resolve the situation without litigation. I wrote, through the Bangkok solicitor, to Kun Prasert's representative, offering to pay 800,000 baht, approximately 18,000 pounds, which was the majority of what remained in my accounts after legal costs, in full and final settlement of the mortgage encumbrance. The offer was declined. The outstanding balance was 2.7 million baht. 800,000 was not a serious counteroffer. I knew it wasn't. I was a budget officer, and I understood negotiation, and I understood that this was not a position from which I could negotiate my way to a good outcome. The offer was the action of a man who needed to have tried everything before he accepted that there was nothing to try. I left the condo in November of 2022. I had lived in it for 22 months. I packed the 2 cases and the backpack in which I had arrived, including the Kenilworth Castle print, which I wrapped carefully in a shirt. I left the furniture, which had cost me approximately 65,000 baht, and which I did not have the capacity to do anything useful with. I took a Songdayu to the bus station on Phetkasem Road, which is exactly where I had arrived 2 years earlier, and I bought a ticket to Bangkok on the same service I had first taken in November of 2020, and I sat in the same kind of window seat and watched the landscape go by in the opposite direction. The light at that hour was the specific late afternoon gold that the Gulf Coast gets when the sun drops toward the western hills, and it was beautiful. I thought, I liked this place. I genuinely liked it. And then I thought, the liking of it is not the part that is relevant right now. I am back in Leamington Spa. I am 70 years old, and I have 4,300 pounds in savings, and a combined pension income of approximately 20,500 pounds per year, and a flat provided by my sister, whose generosity I accept with a gratitude that is occasionally hard to carry, because I have spent my entire life not needing to accept generosity from anyone. The condo in Hua Hin remains, as far as I know, in the ownership situation I left it in. Title in Mali's name, mortgage in her father's books. Litigation still technically possible but not, at my age and with my resources, practically viable. I do not know whether Mali is living in it, or has rented it, or has sold it, or what. I have stopped trying to know. I think about the 40 years fairly often. The spreadsheet, the packed lunches, the Llandudno holidays, the suits with patched elbows. I do not regret any of it. I regret one decision, one specific decision, made in a sales office in Hua Hin in December of 2020, when I looked at a line item of 25,000 baht and decided it was unnecessary. All of the rest of the 40 years was correct. The 40 years were the right way to live. The single decision was the wrong one, and it was wrong in a way that negated the 40 years completely, which is a mathematical outcome I am still, honestly, struggling to accept. In budget terms, the ratio of error to total expenditure was about 1/3 of 1%. In outcome terms, it was 100%. I have never encountered a budget where one line item in the wrong place cost you the entire exercise. I have encountered one now. What I want to tell you is this, and I want to tell it to you with the plain, factual directness of a man who spent 40 years doing budget analysis and who has now done the most important budget analysis of his life, albeit too late to act on it. If you are purchasing property in Thailand, a condo, a house, anything, the single most important expenditure in the entire transaction is independent legal advice from a solicitor, with no connection to the seller, the developer, or anyone you have met through the purchase process. Not the conveyancer recommended by the showroom, not the firm on a list provided by the sales office. Independent. In Thailand, a property solicitor, instructed by you independently, will conduct a title search at the land department, which takes 40 minutes and costs a small registration fee, and which will reveal any encumbrances, mortgages, charges, liens, caveats, registered against the title. This is not an optional service. It is not a luxury for buyers who are spending large amounts. It is the foundation of the transaction. Everything else is secondary to it. The cost of this service ranges from 10,000 to 30,000 baht, depending on the complexity and the firm. That is between £240 and £720. I did not spend it. I spent £173,494 on a unit that had a 2.1 million baht mortgage registered against it the morning after I collected the keys, and I would not spend £600 to check whether it was clean. I made this decision because I had done my research, and I trusted my research, and I believed that spending money on professional advice was the kind of unnecessary expenditure that careful people avoid. I was correct about that principle in the context of everything I had applied it to for 40 years. I was cataclysmically wrong about applying it to this. If you have a nominated Thai person holding a title on your behalf, have a lawyer prepare the trust documentation before any money is transferred. Not after. Not once you are comfortable. Before. The documentation that protects your interest must exist before the funds move, because once the funds move and the title is registered, the leverage to ensure the documentation is properly prepared is gone. I know this. I knew it at the time, in the abstract way that you know things you have read in a government website guidance document. The abstract knowledge and the practical application are different things, and the difference between them, in my case, was £173,494. The Kenilworth Castle print is on the wall of the Leamington Spa flat now, in the same position I gave it in every flat since 1991, above the small chest of drawers that was Jean's. No, Patricia's. I always mix that up. Patricia was my wife. Jean was my mother. My memory does that occasionally now. And I look at it most mornings when I make the instant coffee, still from the same brand I brought to Thailand in the flask, old habits being what they are. It has hung in every place I have lived since 1991. I look at it sometimes and I think about the 40 years of packed lunches and second-hand cars and Landudno holidays that it represents. The 40 years of the kind of careful, intelligent, consistent financial discipline that is supposed to protect you from exactly the situation I ended up in. And then I think, it didn't protect me. Not because it wasn't real, but because I left a gap in it. One specific gap. In the one moment when the gap mattered most. I was so focused on every pound going out that I never saw the 1 pound that would have kept everything else in. I am 70 years old. I would like to tell you I will recover from this. I am working on being honest about whether that is true.